When you're working with colors, there's RGB and there's CMYK, which are the standards color models, but there's also different options like duotones, and you might be working with spot colors, and Photoshop allows you to tap into all these different color options. So let's take a closer look. First of all, I want to explore some options with my process and spot colors. I'm going to go ahead and double click on this foreground here, and I can open up the color picker. And right now I'm going to be getting a color with my color in the CMYK, and as I'm scrolling through I can see different options. I can actually see some warnings about the gamut, and if I pull this out I can see some warnings about the print gamut versus the web gamut. But these are all colors based on a process of blending of other colors, whether it's CMYK or RGB, and then there's some other models in there. The RGB and the CMYK tend to be device dependent, whereas lab colors are more of a technical mathematical version as opposed to a device-based version. But I can still access color libraries, and when I work on color libraries, here's where I can get to some different options. Now there are Pantone colors, and there's a lot of different Pantone libraries. A solid color means that you're going to be working with spot colors, where that's actually color matching. And in order to take advantage of this truly, you need to be taking this to a commercial print shop so that they can use the correct ink. And technically, ink like a varnish or a metallic ink, that's still considered a spot color because spot colors require a separate plate for printing. But there's also versions of Pantone CMYK, and those are going to convert a Pantone color into a process. So although you might not get an exact match, you'll get a close match. And then there's different types of matching systems. So Pantone may be one that people use a lot, but there's other tools and there are other libraries that you might use. I'm going to go here into Pantone Coated, and coated means it's the paper or the actual material that's going to be printed on, versus uncoated may be a paper that's not as glossy. And then I would simply find the color I want. You can actually type in a number. So if I were to type in, for example, 181, and it seems strange, like where do you type it? You just do, and then that option comes up for me. And I can go ahead and click on OK, and now I've got that as a image, or as a foreground color. I can also load that into my swatches, and I could even give it a name, or I could call it swatch 1, and now I have that accessed as my Pantone color. Well, you can also use different color modes when you're working with your image, and here's some options for color modes. We can see this is RGB, and I tend to work in RGB most of the time because our monitor is in RGB, and that allows me to have a wide gamut of colors as I'm working on the screen, and I'll usually shift to CMYK near the end of the process. What I can do, though, is I can choose this grayscale here, and I can discard all of the colors. And technically, before I do that grayscale, I'm going to go ahead and undo. What I actually like doing is using an adjustment layer, which is my black, actually it's my, here it is, black and white. And when I do the black and white adjustment layer, I can kind of slide these items. It gives me a little more control over the contrast, the shadows and highlights. So I'll go ahead and slide that. You can usually get a prettier version of the black and white, something that maybe is more intriguing or dramatic, depending on what I'm trying to create. So that's pretty intense. Definitely looks different than what I had before. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. And then when I choose to image grayscale, okay, and discard all that information. Oh, you know what? Let me do one more thing. I'm going to go ahead and first of all flatten these layers. Go to Layer menu and flatten everything. So I've applied that, and now we'll go ahead and choose our grayscale. And so now we've got the more dramatic version of that grayscale as opposed to the default options. Well, once something's in grayscale, then I can take advantage of the duotone. And a duotone actually allows you to use different versions of it. So it's called duotone, but you can actually have a monotone, a duo, a tritone, or a quadtone. And it just has to do with how many kinds of inks you're going to use. And you did duotone, that's kind of the traditional. But what's great about it is a lot of times when you're printing something using spot colors, you're usually using the paper, a black ink, and then a spot color. And instead of having your images that are all black and white, you can incorporate that spot color that you were using. So I'll go ahead to my color library, and I think I picked this one, yep. And so I can pick that color that I was using, or I could have even gotten my eyedropper and picked up the color right here. And then I can combine them, and you can see how they are going together. You can also change the order of these. So if I were to pick this up with my brown and then make this one, go back to the picker, make this one the black, it can give you a slightly different option of how you're putting them into place. Or perhaps in this one I want to use white, and I could create some different effects in here. And that's the big idea of taking these colors and blending them together, because ultimately it's going to be a more interesting picture than just a black version or just a Pantone version. I got to rename it. It does make sure you have a name. Click on OK. So here's what it is with a little bit of extra spot color. And if I use my Control Z, you can see what it was without any of that spot color. And there it goes back. Another interesting effect is that this image was originally RGB. So if I go ahead and change this back to RGB, I'm not going to get any of those colors back. They were discarded when I switched them. There was actually that message that told me they were discarded. But they're still stored in history because I haven't done any editing to the size of this image. And for that reason, what I could do is I could start painting, for example, over here on the buildings, and I could start painting back the color that was stored in my original history. And if I wanted to be really safe about this, I probably would have created another layer and another mask. But you can see how you can create a really interesting effect in here by combining some different elements together. Well, now you've seen how working with color modes like the duotone or the RGB as well as spot colors can help you intensify your images. Now it's time for a pop quiz. How many colors are used in a duotone? A, 1, B, 3, C, 4, D, all of the above. The answer is D, all of the above. You often think of duotones typically used with 2 colors, but it actually can be used with 1 through 4 colors.